Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm reviewing a book which is one of the very special books that I have. I read this when I was a schoolboy basically, and it's a long time ago now. It's called Friends at Court by Henry Cecil, and it's part of 3 books about a barrister called Roger Thursby. The book's now been published by House of Stratus. It was published by various different publishers over the years. I've given it a title. Henry Cecil is still as fresh as ever. The stories and characters don't change much over the years, and the prose is delightfully light. And it is. I've reviewed a number of other books, but this one I'm going to review in a little bit of detail. There's the book itself. There's the back cover, which actually explains a little bit. It does actually have a few spoilers in it, believe it or not, because it tells you a bit about what goes on in the book. The book is quite old now. That's a bit of detail about Henry Cecil, and then you've got the actual front page, and then you've got the poor little book is falling to pieces. There is the main contents section right at the end. It's not a long book at all. 200 pages. He starts off a question of silk, and he ends up taking silk. And I don't think I'm spoiling it for you when I say he does. But it's the way it's written, and I've loved them all the way through. But remember that, of course, Henry Cecil started out writing short stories, and effectively quite a lot of these are short stories, but they are so clearly written, and as I said, they have a real impact even today. Even though you've got to know there have been some changes, you've got social changes and other changes, but they're still worth a read. So what do I say about the book? Well, the 20th century advertising blurb for Henry Cecil's Friends at Court says the following: that Roger Thursby is prospering in the legal profession and is about to be made a Queen's Counsel. And in this brilliantly funny sequel to Brothers-in-Law, we follow him through a further series of hilarious legal highs and lows. Well, they are quite funny, but they're jocular in that sense. And of course, we knew Thursby as one of the brothers-in-law from an excellent television series with Ian Carmichael and Richard Attenborough. And of course, we follow him through with Friends at Court and then Sober as a Judge, when he eventually is elevated to the bench. This, of course, book doesn't tell the full tale, or this quote even, because as his pupil master would have expected him to do, for this is a rather splendid and special book for yesterday and today, although you have to have some knowledge of the Thursby saga to understand the story and the others that go with it, which feature a rather priggish Roger. But but you obviously do have to tell the full tale. That's what I'm going to try and do here, in the sense of explaining what the book's about, because to us the storyline is as fresh as the first time, certainly I read it over 50 years ago now. Both the story's format and the writing style have that, what I describe as a splendid light touch, with its lack of complication, which makes it what it was originally aimed at, the essence of the bestseller, because I believe he was a very popular writer. You had other books, the Doctors in the House series and so forth, and then you had the vet books and all these other things, and then you had sort of books about vicars and so forth. So it was all a little bit of a dig at the professions. But as I've said, you know you have to be complex, awful and most contemporary today to get published. But these stories by Cecil, His Honour Judge Leon, were from what's called a bygone age, basically. It was carefree, it was relatively simple compared with what we have today, even though the cases in reality were actually a lot more complex, and the facts generally pretty disgusting even then in some cases. Now, the original work commented that Thursby's original appearance was where he first displayed his ignorance in the law courts. Well, I think we've all done that from time to time, I have to say, much to the consternation of part of the legal establishment in 1956, who didn't like being twitted. And of course there was that comment, I do remember hearing about it. But with Friends at Court, Thursby has grown in knowledge and stature as he prepares to take silk, And the way he does it is also quite quaint, even by our standards today. I found it quaint anyway. We follow Thursby in one of his last cases as a junior, where he represents a defendant, to what was then the Court of Criminal Appeal, as it was then known. It's now the Court of Appeal Criminal Division, but it was a slightly different structure then. His client is described as estimable Swiss hotel proprietor, Mr. Glacier, an interesting name, who is just the sort of client we would come across today, sadly, as they don't seem to change very much. The allegations involved an alleged breach of the licensing laws, where the client might or might not have offered a bribe to a police inspector, and the inspector might or might not have taken it. Now read on. I'm not going to give you the spoilers. Now, as with all of Henry Cecil's books, his characters are what makes his work so relevant today, even though the laws and procedures have changed a bit. You've still got the people, you see. That's the important thing. And the commentary 60 years ago continues in saying, the law's delays are very pleasantly increased by the appearance of many choice characters. That's in the book here. Remember the short story concept I said earlier, such as the high-speed Grimes, incoherent Crabtree, omniscient young Anthony Trent, who I thought was really rather good fun. Remind you of anyone? Certainly reminded me of one or two people, who in 3 months at the bar has learnt everything except sense. And there's another appearance of a favourite, Mr. Green, decades before the creation of Norman Stanley Fletcher. Mr. Green, of course, was played by Terry Thomas in the film, and it was a wonderful cameo. Let me conclude, because as you gather, I love the books, and they really are worth reading even now. Cecil is better than ever, said P.G. Wodehouse. Quite right, he described that work in that way, and the humour is as funny as ever without causing any offence. Very much what Wodehouse was like himself, in my view. And I miss some of them because I really do think the simplicity really does make it a lot. It makes it easier to read, but it's more interesting. I don't want to hear all the sordid stuff. I've got enough of it on television and the newspapers. Now, all Cecil books are easy to read as light legal stories. He always excels as a short story writer, with the vignettes to run the plots along quite nicely, and this one certainly does because he's running the storyline through. And they're well worth devouring today to acquire a more rounded knowledge of where the common law is today, how it's developed, and I think they cheer one up after a tough day in court. And I'd like to thank the late Henry Cecil very much. I can't, but I'd like to thank him anyway because I've really enjoyed the books. There it is again, and there's the stuff on the back. Thank you so much. I'm very glad I discovered the books. There are loads of them in the series, but they're well worth reading. And if you have got a few, they don't take long to read either, do have a read of them. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.